previously on Drone Wars.
And what we figured out was just like leadership, like as a Master Chief, my whole job was to make more Master Chiefs, right?
And I'm sure part of it is you bang your head against the wall, and that's what it is. What does the DoD need to do better, right?
They do what's easiest for them to do programmatically. So do I have to do another 5 weeks of work to get this new thing approved? Or can I grab something that's on the shelf that's already approved for counter ID and just say, okay, well, this is counter UAS, call it counter UAS now. The name change is a lot easier than starting over. But you're not encouraging people toward a common goal. It's all just, here's all the things that separate us now. I can vouch for your stuff. I can vouch for your stuff, but you guys don't want to get together because it's bad. I need to represent you, which is kind of sophomoric and childish and stupid, but it also means that you can't get aligned the right way.
Yeah.
This is Jake Windle. I'm an investor at Harpoon Ventures, and you're watching the Drone Wars podcast.
Okay, so you're a new defense startup. Let's call when I met you 10 years ago, we'll call that Defense Tech 1.0. Yep. Now we're in Defense Tech 2.0. It's hot. There's a lot of money in the space. What do you think both companies first and then investors who are new to this space don't understand when you sell to the DoD that they need to understand? Let's start with companies.
Yeah, how much time do we have? It's
plenty of time.
So
let's go.
With companies specifically, you need to understand that nobody cares about anything other than the technology. And does your technology stack meet the key performance parameters expressed in the capability development document? So there's this whole process for DoD identifying a capability, developing a document, putting key performance parameters, thresholds for minimum performance, objective for where we want to be in a couple of years. And all that is laid out in the programmatics. And that is informed by that individual PM's understanding of what's in the market.
Totally.
And you can imagine we don't have amazing technologists in DoD who know exactly what's going on in the venture-backed technology world. And that's really what we identified during the counter UAS time, is that, okay, we don't have the level of technology access that we need. How do we get that? We try to go through PMs and they do market research. And we're like, how do you do market research? They're like, well, we Google it. I'm like, okay, makes sense. And there's some, sources of information that work out really well for these guys. And there's a lot that don't. So we're like, look, you're Googling it. I can Google. I've got the same access to technology that you do. But once I started working with Craig and some of these seed founders, I realized that, and I didn't know any of this at the time, I realized that there's a bunch of companies in stealth mode and running around that are doing really cool stuff that nobody knows about. And even in the commercial world, much less the government world. So how do you get access to that tech? You have to work with some early stage venture funds. He introduced me to the guys at Homebrew. Yep. They called and said, hey, why does DoD care about human machine teaming? I said, they don't, which means it's probably a good time for you guys to invest in the technology because DoD didn't see it coming. And we knew that was how this happens a lot in DoD. The concept of here's a new UAS that the enemy is using. DoD doesn't see this coming. They don't track it live, and then they overreact and they dump probably 5 times the amount of money that they should have on the back end because they're paying what we call technical debt.
Yep.
Because they didn't have access to the tech at the very beginning, so now they have to pay somebody a premium to come in and kind of save them programmatically from themselves, and they're having to pay off that technical debt with $3 billion, like the Marine talked about, and not a commensurate level of technology. So we said, okay, we're not going to do a good job with government here. There's too many structural impediments. We're not going to ever get there. So, and some people are pretty good, like DARPA does a good job, Incutel does a good job, but they're limited as well to their individual networks. And inbound, it's an opt-in thing with somebody approaching DARPA and saying, does the government care about this? Same thing, somebody approaching Incutel at the agency, does somebody care about this? It's opt-in. They do a pretty good job now, but back then it was like, nobody knew what they were doing. When Gilman Louis was in charge back then. He's an awesome guy, really knows the space and what he's talking about. And then DIU comes up and goes, hey, we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna build a bridge in between Silicon Valley and you guys. So that first GeoDI deal that we did was with DIU. They said, hey, we've got some autonomy dollars. I said, cool. I know an autonomy company working right here in San Diego. And they brought their, at the time, crappy prototype and was flying around, bumping into stuff.
I remember watching it fly into a room and right out of a window.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, well, there's some potential here. I get it. Because we looked at everything else, and everything else was one pilot to one drone. And it wasn't going to work. It wasn't scalable. It was obvious back then it wasn't scalable. So like, how do we make this work? Drones have to make decisions autonomously. I'm like, that sounds expensive. But Ryan and Brandon were like, yeah, we'll do it. They hired Nate out of Carnegie Mellon and brought him on board. And here we go. Now we're moving. So I think what we saw was that the government wasn't going to build that ecosystem themselves. And if they were, it wasn't going to be effective. Still call it kabuki, innovation theater, right? Like it's not, look, we established an on-ramp for innovation. You're still expecting someone to drive their car up your on-ramp. And you can't force that. You have to just open up the avenue and hope that the right people opt in. Back then we thought, okay, who does this for a living? Like who's incentivized to do it? It's about aligning incentives, right? And from a leadership perspective, from a business perspective, how do you align incentives internally with external variables? So we have to make sure that our incentives are aligned with other people's incentives, and that's how we get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
Who's incentivized to do this the right way? I'm like, dude, I know the venture capital guys that fund this stuff. They're better than anybody else in the world. That's why other high net worth individuals give them their money and say, go invest it for me, because they're the best in the world at this. Right. So if they're already incentivized to do this because of they have to provide an ROI to their LPs, why don't we just look at what they're funding and pull that into DoD as early as possible, instead of waiting for, okay, we could go build a capability requirement that we need with performance parameters, and we turn it over to the big primes and have them compete, and they come back with this fancy white paper saying they could save the world with their technology. We know it's not true. We know when we give $1 to some of these big companies, we're going to get about 60 cents of value back because of all the cost, the previous cost built into the G&A, and it's allowable costs, right, for R&D. But a startup that doesn't know any of that stuff, they don't know that all these costs are allowable that they can build in. They're incentivized to make you really happy as their anchor customer. That inherent pressure of the startup world, and that's one of those pressures, the anchor customer, that dovetails really nicely into these inherent weaknesses or gaps in the government procurement process. So if you could time those right and line up the right funding at the right time, you can support a company like Shield AI that we did their initial conversation with Homebrew. They did the seed round with some other folks, and then they took off with development. They layered DIU money on top of that, because DIU was like, oh, Homebrew, Satya Patel, I know those guys, Hunter Walk. They do a great job in the venture world. And we'd already talked to them. We'd already kind of set the groundwork. So DIU gave them their first $1 million, and Ryan and Brandon used that momentum to go back and raise from Andreessen the Series A, and then they were off and running. And they've obviously, we had a very small part in the instantiation of that, because they've done a great job with mergers and acquisitions, and they working their asses off for the last 10 years to make it work. But that's how that really got started, was us saying, hey, these people do this for a living. Sure. Why would we not just rely on them? And not in NSW specifically, in the government, we like to self-certify. We're the best. Just ask us. We'll tell you how great we are. Right. But that doesn't work when you're talking about technology. You can't self-certify. The primes love to self-certify. Our stuff's amazing. And then this Army guy said it's amazing. He's not a technical expert. You're not a technical expert. Let's go to the technical experts, the guys that have started and run companies, and now they're in charge of funding companies. Let's repurpose their process to make us faster and better. And we did it. And you don't have to do it your entire budget. We did $1 million for Shield AI. Now it's, I don't know, somewhere up in the billions for evaluation. But we had an entire amazing drone autonomy team working for us, specifically in NSW, on our problem sets for a year for $1 million. Like, if you try to get Shield AI to work on your problem set now for a year, the whole company would cost you $250 million. Exactly. Because they've got the gravity associated with these big programmatic dollars. They have to service that. You can't come back and say, nah, we'll do $1 million. They wouldn't. They'd be like, it's just not enough money for us. Yep. But you got to get involved early. So that's why we started that whole process. Yeah.
Drone Wars is recorded from Firestorm's global headquarters in San Diego, California. Each episode is filmed inside our X-Cell, a modular industrial-grade manufacturing facility designed to be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours for on-demand drone production. Each week on the podcast, we bring you cutting-edge insights from unmanned industry leaders. Listen as they share the breakthroughs and technologies they're working on, the hard lessons they've learned, and the bold predictions about what the next 5 to 10 years in unmanned systems and advanced manufacturing have in store for us. Enjoying the show so far? Then be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now back to the show. Okay, so now answer the second part of this question. As investors, there's a lot of new investors coming into defense, right? For a variety of reasons. That's probably a whole nother podcast. Yeah. What do they not know about backing companies that are going to sell to the DoD primarily, or maybe even other primes that they need to know?
It's a good question. I mean, there's a lot when you take the standard, which I'm still learning. I'm at Harpoon Ventures now. I'm an investment partner there, and that's where Larson, the guy that we mentioned, was at Lightspeed when they first invested in Citadel. That's where he is. He's a GP. He went and raised money based on the kind of the thematic elements here. Like, hey, I can go raise money and support early stage companies selling almost solely into the DoD. Part of the reason why we use startups is that they pivot really quickly. They understand this isn't working. Nobody cares about this. Like in the military, we say, hey, this is a great plan, but the enemy has a say. So here's the most likely course of action. Here's the most dangerous course of action. You plan for those. And we do the same thing in the venture world. And they plan for, here's most likely market reaction, right? And here's the most dangerous market reaction. What are our 3 or 4 options for pivoting or understanding that and making change to our product, our process based on that? I think that's what the folks that want to get involved in defense investing now need to understand, that the market has a say here. And the bad part is that the market isn't your user in DoD most of the time. The market is your customer, like who's paying the bill. And there's a disconnect in between. So if I go to the store and say, I don't like this and I want to return my headphones because they don't work or whatever, that's the customer saying they don't like the product. There are very few venues for actual warfighter customers in DoD to get that feedback back to the company. There's 9 layers of program, product, contract management in between the customer and the product provider. So in between us and Citadel, there was 0 layers.
It was incredible.
Because we talk to you guys every single day in the field, because we used somebody else's money outside of our organization to pay for some stuff, which a lot of people were not happy about when they found out about it. They're like, well, you didn't ask us for permission. I'm like, we didn't, because we didn't use your money.
Yeah. Well, you didn't give them a DIU contract.
Well, I don't need your permission because I'm not using your money. I use this other guy's money, so I have his permission to spend it on this. That's the whole point of having those relationships. And those little pockets of innovation and smart relationships exist in a lot of different places.
Totally.
A lot of it happens organically because of an acute need, like counter IED or counter UAS or counterinsurgency or counter something else, where people are like, I just had to do what worked because I don't have time to go through the normal process and 18 months get my new MRAP out here. I need the one that's mine resistant now.
Totally.
Why? Because people are dying every day getting
exactly.
Like there's an impetus here to do that. That kind of pressure can be bad in the DoD world because they're going to say, okay, what do we already have on the shelf? Let's just retrofit that. Which
easy button. So we're
retrofitting normal Humvees with up armor kits, and then we had suspension problems because they were breaking, because they were too heavy because of up armor. We had all these other issues while the MRAP was being developed, and then before they really good book about that.
It's a great book, one of the best books. We'll put a link to the screen on it.
Basically capturing the MRAP contract and how that happened, and kind of like the Higgins boat back in World War II, where everybody was against it, and that's what ended up helping us win the Pacific and Europe, because everybody was like, no, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's a heavy drinking, foul mouth, fatso out of Louisiana. Like, we can't trust this guy.
Is that me you're talking about?
No. That was Higgins at the Higgins boat. But then he came in and proved that he can mass manufacture these things that helped us win the war in the Pacific specifically.
All right. So basically, if you're a VC, you got to understand, just because a customer is buying something in small quantities doesn't mean there's a $1 billion opportunity on the other side.
And we saw with Citadel, where you guys were the program record choice for small tactical counter UAS. So guys on the move in a vehicle, just give me a bubble and keep everything out. And that's what Citadel did really well. I don't know, 7 years later, after we had already done that contract and proven that reliability, 7 years later, we saw an actual contract from one of the big component commands saying, hey, we want this big new prime to come in and be the system integrator. And here's $1 billion IDIQ to be a systems integrator for a counter UAS. And you're like, what?
What background do you guys have in?
It's 7 years after we identified a solution that works. And now you're going to finally award a contract, not to the guys that proven they work, but other guys that can say that, yeah, we can pull all this stuff together as necessary. Like, well, what are we talking about here? But again, that's how long that process takes to go from here's a new requirement through the soft SIDS or JSIDS capability development process, the whole way through to programmatic docs getting approved and out the door. It's a mess.
So let's talk drones here for just a couple minutes. You got to obviously see, and your guys got to see downrange, the first kind of use of the modified DJIs, 2015, 2016, right? We've come a long way since then, right? What do you think the next couple years looks like with the deployment of drones, in combat and maybe even outside of combat too? Because I know you guys look at some stuff and have worked on some stuff that doesn't make its way to the battlefield, but maybe to the farm or to, autonomous trucks like Kodiak. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think as the big limitation right now on I guess the ubiquity of drones and the battlefield and everything else is just energy density in the battery set. So you might get 40 to 50 minutes out of a really good small UAS. And we're seeing on the current battlefield in Ukraine that guys can go inside and close a door and hide for an hour, and they come out and that drone has run out of battery. The one that's hovering right there waiting for them to come out. Or the smart guys in Ukraine, we've seen the video, they land the drone on top of a tank and they just wait. And the Russians in the tank think the drones are all gone. They open the hatch and then they clack off because they're sitting right next to it. So that's really the limiting factor right now. And whenever those batteries get to the point where they're, whatever it is, the longevity, the density of those packs get better, and they're getting better every day. And once they get to a couple hours, it's going to be a mess. Because then you're talking about, having done, 500 different combat missions, right? You're on a 2-hour infiltration. So you're hiking up to where you need to be. Then you do, 3 to 4 hours of on-target work if it's a dense target with a lot of stuff, or maybe like an hour if it's not that dense. And then you hike back out and then helicopter picks you up. Right now, there's certain aspects of that mission where you're vulnerable to these drones, where you're hiking in, you're hiking out. A lot of people moving in a certain direction. It's easy to pick up on, especially with new, cheaper thermal stuff. So you're at risk during those elements, right? But you're only at risk for 30 and 40-minute chunks once you see a drone, because they don't have that much duration, especially the FPVs that go really fast. They go through 15, 20 minutes of battery really quickly because they preheat the battery and they dump all that energy really quickly. So I think the longer you're exposed to bad things happening, bad things are going to happen. The bad guys are getting more shots on goal because of the energy density of these batteries. And I think it's going to be a hard issue to keep up with in the future, especially as some of these small, quiet drones that are at higher altitudes that are going to have that long duration. They can just hang out. Like the Firestorm drone, you can hang out for a couple hours, and once you see something that you don't like, you dive in and blow it up. That's going to be a big thing pretty soon here, that you could have multiple motors. You can have different modes of propulsion. So you can hang out in a loiter mode, just real slow, burning holes in the sky like an ISR bird. And then once you see something, you're diving down like a seabird and just going in to cram it. You're like, I'm almost out of battery. Let's just dive this thing into the ground and blow up the first thing we can and move on. And we're seeing that in Ukraine and other places. But it's really hard to predict where that's going to go. Just like we didn't see Al Qaeda's use of drones overseas. We didn't see that. Nobody saw that coming. Everybody was like, we kind of did, but it was not to the level that everybody that we see now. Not even close to that. We were all like, yeah, they're going to use some drones. It'll be cool. Yeah. Then, a couple of months later, you see grenades with badminton shuttlecocks taped to the end of it, and they have a little servo, and they're just programming themselves to drop it and blow stuff up. And people are like, now instead of my hand on my gun or my electronic warfare stuff or whatever, you're looking up. Everybody's like, what is that noise? I heard something. I saw something. And then now you're not focused on the mission. Now you're not focused on the immediate threat. And that's what these guys are really good at. They're focused. They're really good at distracting operational elements, so they have to worry about that, and they can't worry about their job or the threat or what they're there to do in the first place. That has nothing to do with the drones.
So Jake, if people want to reach out and talk to you or learn more, where can they find you? Twitter or LinkedIn? Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I don't do the rest of social media. I mean, LinkedIn is turning into a lot with the rest of what I don't like about social media. But from a professional perspective, LinkedIn or harpoon.vc. And if you follow Harpoon on LinkedIn, follow Larson. He's got some really cool stories about the background of the company, how we were founded, and get a good idea of how we see the world and how we think about technology development and why we like what we're doing and where we see the future based on it. We do daily posts on LinkedIn and try to figure out what our internal calculus is like. Thanks, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the Drone Wars podcast. Each week, we bring you fascinating conversations with leaders shaping the future of air, sea, land, and space technologies. Catch new episodes every Tuesday wherever podcasts can be found. Until then, we'll see you next time.